You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 24th of March 2014. Sudanese paedophile sues Britain because his parole hearing was delayed and his human rights were breached, and he's already cost the taxpayer £125,000. A legal immigrant who fathered 5 children while in the UK is jailed for 21 months. Starving Banstead pensioner Gloria Foster's Sutton Care Agency staff Care First 24 charged for immigration offences following police raid. Newburys Muslims dismayed over store's alcohol licence fearing antisocial behaviour. Italy rescues 2,000 boat migrants. Sweden, truck collapses sending 200 frozen pigs flying. France, Calais struggles with UK-bound illegal migrants. Pro-Russian crowds seize 2 Ukrainian warships as Ukraine prepares to pull troops from Crimea. Egypt court sentences 528 Brotherhood members to death. Thought for the day, the cowardly BBC, and finally 2 for 1 day Monday. UK news. Sudanese paedophile sues Britain because his parole hearing was delayed and his human rights were breached, and he's already cost the taxpayer £125,000. A Sudanese paedophile jailed for 4 years for raping and sexually abusing teenage girls is suing Justice Secretary Chris Grayling after his parole hearing was delayed. Adil Abul Qadir, 38, was one of the 5 refugees from Darfur who attacked girls aged 13 and 14 before costing UK taxpayers £125,000 in illegally aided lawyer and interpreter fees during their trial. Abul Qadir, then of Dartford, Kent, was handed an open-ended jail term with at least 4 years behind bars after he was convicted of rape and 3 counts of sexual activity with a child at Maidstone Crown Court in May 2008. He has now convinced a judge at London's High Court that his human rights were arguably violated by the parole board's failure to consider his release as soon as his minimum prison term expired. World at 8. Give him to me for a few minutes and I'll give him his human rights all right. Whip him off and stuff him in his trap and send him home. Those poor little girls didn't have any human rights, did they? A legal immigrant who fathered 5 children while in the UK is jailed for 21 months. An illegal immigrant who fathered 5 children after arriving in the UK on a fake British passport has been sent to jail. Mohammed Zalkifir, 55 of Amberley Street, Bradford Moor, Bradford, was caught after he applied for a licence to get work as a doorman in the security industry and used the passport to support his application. Further inquiries revealed the person named in the passport had reported his stolen, while a national insurance number quoted by Zalkifar belonged to a dead man. In fact, Zalkifar accepted entering the country illegally in 2002, having paid an agent in Pakistan around £15,000. Zalkifar was found guilty by a jury at Bradford Crown Court of using the fake British passport to gain employment and possessing the Pakistan passport with counterfeit endorsements. Jailing him at Leeds Crown Court yesterday for a total of 21 months, Recorder Keith Miller said the fake British passport was a sophisticated forgery and it was only an expert who was examining it in minute detail who would spot some spelling mistakes on the small print. Recorder Miller told Zalkifar it will be up to the Home Office what happened over his deportation, but it was open to his family to go to Pakistan themselves. World at 8, you are my main man, Mr. Recorder, my main man. Starving Banstead pensioner Gloria Foster's Sutton Care Agency staff Care First 24 charged for immigration offences following police raid. 2 people arrested following a raid on a Sutton Care Agency, which would then collapse and see a forgotten patient starved to death, have been charged with immigration and conspiracy offences. Mahendran Singh Kusiaram, 49, and Saras Bedi Kusiaram, 52, both of Burden Lane in Sutton, were charged following a raid on Care First 24 in Upper Mulgrave Road in January last year. The agency was used by both Sutton and Surrey councils to supply care workers for disabled and elderly people in both areas. Care First 24 was shut down following the raid, and the councils were asked to find alternative care for service users. Although Sutton Council made provisions for all its patients, one of Surrey County Council's patients, Gloria Foster from Banstead, slipped through the net and was left to starve to death. 35-year-old Iranian man from Purley, also arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to facilitate in connection with the investigation, has been bailed to return on 10th of June 2014. Carla Callob, 29, and Kendrich Callob, 32, formerly of Cheam Common Road, North Cheam, were both convicted of possession of identity card offences at Croydon Crown Court on December the 20th. Both were given suspended sentences, 12 months for Mrs Callob and 9 months for Mr Callob. The pair, who were arrested as part of the investigation, have since returned to their home country of the Philippines. World at 8. But no one has been charged with Gloria Foster's death. And if you saw the truly terrible conditions of the dog-killing houses of the Filipinos, you would wonder why the Brits ever take them on to care for anyone, let alone vulnerable British humans. Newbury Muslims dismayed over store's alcohol licence fearing antisocial behaviour. Members of the Muslim community have been left angry and upset by West Berkshire Council's decision to allow a new supermarket to sell alcohol next door to Newbury Mosque, Pound Street. The secretary of the mosque, Shamin Ahmed, has warned that the decision may well prompt them to look at moving to another area. World at 8, oh God, not Borden. But I'm glad that someone has offended these small-minded, superiority-obsessed people at last. They are the newcomers here, not us. European news. Italy rescues 2,000 boat migrants. Italian naval and coast guard vessels rescued more than 2,000 migrants travelling in boats from North Africa over the past 48 hours, authorities said on Wednesday, underlining the scale of illegal migration into southern Europe. The announcement came a day after some 500 people forced their way into Spain's North African enclave of Melilla, the largest number to storm the border in almost a decade. The Italian Navy said 2,128 migrants have been rescued by ships operating in the Mare Nostrum task force off the southern coast of Sicily, including 596 picked up at sea on March 17th, who were expected to arrive at the port of Augusta on Wednesday. World at 8. Clearly the message is not getting through to the Italian Navy, is it? Sweden. Truck collapse sends 200 frozen pigs flying. Bystanders were left in shock when a truck collapsed in central Sweden, sending more than 200 frozen pigs flying across the road. I've worked for 40 years as a policeman and not seen a truck that's just collapsed like this, and definitely not with pigs inside, Anders Wallin of the Örebro Police told The Local. Everything went everywhere. It truly was flying pigs. World at 8. Need that when the Muslims are praying in the streets, don't we? I love flying piggies. France. Calais struggles with UK-bound illegal migrants. The northern French port of Calais is facing a double problem: a high concentration of illegal immigrants hoping to make their way across the Channel to Britain, and one of the highest levels of unemployment in the country. Hundreds of the homeless migrants throng the streets around the port, living in makeshift camps and squatting in empty houses in this economically blighted city. Every day the immigrants from countries as diverse as Syria and Ethiopia line up for food handouts from local charities. But not everyone in Calais is so well disposed towards them. And the deaths of 3 of the migrants in the last month, one drowned, one stabbed and another crushed to death in the back of a lorry, have made their presence in the city a key issue in this weekend's local elections, an issue France's far right is keen to exploit. World at 8. What's this about the far right? Anyone in his right mind can see one day, in the not so distant future, it'll be them or us for handouts. World news. Pro-Russian crowds seize 2 Ukrainian warships as Ukraine prepares to pull troops from Crimea. Pro-Russian crowds seized 2 Ukrainian warships Thursday, and Ukraine said its troops were being threatened in Crimea as it prepared to pull its troops and their families from the region. National Security and Defence Council Secretary Andriy Parubay said that the Ukraine will seek UN support to turn Crimea into a demilitarised zone as it prepares to relocate as many as 25,000 soldiers and their families to the Ukrainian mainland. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and sailors are trapped on military bases, surrounded by heavily armed Russian forces and pro-Russia militia. Egypt court sentences 528 Brotherhood members to death. An Egyptian criminal court sentenced 528 members of the Muslim Brotherhood to death on Monday over assaulting police stations in the Upper Egyptian province of Minya last August, official news agency MENA reported. The Brotherhood suspects were charged with attacking a police premise in Matai district and killing its deputy head after the dispersal of a major sit-in staged by supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi in Cairo last August. They were also accused of breaking into governmental institutions, shooting randomly on security men, stealing police weapons and burning police stations, along with terrorising local residents and disturbing public peace. During the second hearing of the mass trial, 153 were in detention while the rest were sentenced in absentia. The convicted are among more than 1,200 of Morsi supporters who are on trial in Minya. A second group of about 700 defendants, including the Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood Mohammed Badi, will stand trial on Tuesday. World at 8. Oh, I like these Egyptian generals a lot. Thought for the day: the cowardly BBC bows to Islam. By Giulio Miotti. This article was sent in by I'm No Kafar and is all about the programme whose motto is "Britain is a democracy where we can say what we want. So let's say it." The BBC likes to consider itself a brave broadcasting company when attacking the Catholic Church on sexual abuses. The famous BBC documentary entitled Sex Crimes in the Vatican consisted of 38 minutes and 57 seconds of accusations against the Vatican, or when airing a horrible live programme from a clinic where doctors perform abortions. The BBC also likes to depict itself as a libertine when proposing gay-friendly entertainment for its viewers. The CBBC, the branch of the UK public broadcaster in charge of programmes for children, has launched a format for the cultural diffusion of gender diversity, a euphemism for gay culture. But when it comes to gays and Islam, Auntie, as the British call the broadcaster, is cowardly and bows to Sharia. The British public broadcaster has just been accused of censorship after its free speech show, symbolically dedicated to freedom of speech in the UK, banned a part of the programme which dealt with homosexuality in the Islamic world. It was to include a clip of an interview with Asifa Lahore, the most famous lesbian Muslim in England. A question that I would like to submit to the Islamic community is: when will it be right to be Muslim and homosexual? The question was removed after pressure from the Birmingham Central Mosque. But isn't this a programme whose motto is "Britain is a democracy where we can say what we want, so let's say it"? Created by the homosexual Lord Reith and with a programme that recognises equal opportunities for homosexual employees, including the right to a marriage leave, the BBC has responded to criticism. Acting on the basis of respect for the mosque, we took the decision to postpone the debate on the rights of gay Muslims. Wow. This is the same media source that does not hesitate to accuse other religions, Jewish and Christian, of homophobia just about every day. It is the same media source that fomented a war against Russia's Putin on LGTB propaganda. Don't you just love it when PC trips over MC? End of article. Lovely, short and succinct. The BBC holds itself up as a pinnacle of diversity and multiculture, to which ordinary mortals, and in fact everyone, should try to emulate in real life in the real world. And yet even these paragons of virtue have two great enemies, of which both they are entirely ignorant. One, the Muslim enclaves, and two, the GBW, or rather what is left of the great British worker. The establishment and its propaganda machine, the BBC, are unwittingly caught in a hard place, using the Muslims to grind down the GBW, fairly successfully, in that we now have at least two generations of men, women and children who could quite easily live the lives they lead without ever leaving their houses, let alone mixing with like-minded people and forming opinions and living their lives in the open in a fairly normal, old-fashioned way. All this has been calculated, worked towards and has been very successful in creating a downwardly mobile population easy to control and manipulate. But of course it opens the very many doors that the followers of Islam have been waiting for, those of acceptance if not downright submission of the people of this country through their own televisions and BBC and ITV propaganda. The hoo-ha about female genital mutilation has been a bugbear of nationalists for a great many years. It was well known in the 70s that rich Arabs would bring their daughters to Harley Street to be operated on, and yet the BBC and other channels are treating it as if this government have opened all our eyes to what has been happening for donkey's years and is very much a part of the African, Arab and Muslim culture in a great many countries of the world, most of whose inhabitants are now over here doing just that. 93% of rapes in this country are not carried out by our village idiots, retards and sadists, but Muslim village idiots, retards and sadists, and indeed are yet another nail in the BBC's coffin with their ridiculous carry-ons, committees, so-called journalists and do-gooders having totally ignored the British National Party for the last 20 years, saying something was stinking in the north of this country and it wasn't fish. I've given up counting the sheer number of points from our manifesto that have been suddenly adopted by the more acceptable political parties in the UK and subsequently aired to death on the BBC and hailed as new. If there was a large golden potty to be awarded to anyone for all the shite they take and make their own or plagiarism for the educated, the BBC would get it. We even have a Scottish twit of a female variety who has said that sovereignty over defence should be removed from nation states and handed to a European Defence Force at the Scottish Labour Conference. Miss Mara, who no doubt advocates Scottish independence as well, is most welcome to stay over her side of Hadrian's Wall for many years, as are her compatriots. We have enough idiots at the BBC already. It is the BBC that waves the Islamic and black flags at every opportunity, whether it's needed or not, and most people are bored to death with it. The anti-white perspective of most, if not all, the plays, series and films that are allowed, both home-produced and from the US, are pathetic, but dangerous, as they are doing what it says on the tin: anti-white hatred agenda, do not open. Young children are being raised with the almost opposite ideas of standards that we were. Childminders and strangers are their carers. Most do not have a resident male in the house. Many are submerged with toys and electrical crap to keep them quiet and in their rooms. TV has assumed pride of place, and what messages go out to these babes? That everyone on this form of entertainment is either black, mixed race or Asian, and it is normal for this to be so. Homosexual or odd partners are favoured. Why the word partner as opposed to husband, father or stepfather or friend? Partner relates to sports, not a relationship, unless of course you aren't sure of who is what, then I can offer no advice. Young white males are usually drug-ridden, victims or criminals, and even if their homes are upper-class mansions, they always go to the local comp. As of course with mega-rich parents one does. White girls are always vulnerable, promiscuous, pregnant or having abortions willy-nilly, and usually being bedded by a black or Asian guy, and the family seem very happy about it. Older white guys are usually perverts with whingy useless wives. White parents are an odd lot of either upper-class drunks and adulterers or lower-class retards who don't work, and all seem to have houses busting with a multicultural dysphoria of mixed race or homosexuals or lesbians, all of whom their parents, if they have two, seem to accept as the norm. Whilst black families are portrayed as having a resident working father, which they don't normally, a hard-working, attractive black wife and a lovely home with a swish car. Oh, please. Do you wonder that most of our young white don't even have the confidence to commit the rapes and crimes that the young of the newcomers seem to take to like dogs to shite? And of course all through it we have the Muslims looking on and taking the piss out of all of us all the time, and the BBC simply refuse to acknowledge that intensive anti-white propaganda, even in the name of equality, has proved the biggest detriment to social growth in this country. We used to be a white island, a Christian island, a self-serving industrial nation of farmers, fishermen and shopkeepers. We had movement in our towns and cities during working hours, not just lunch breaks. We had shops that sold all that we needed. We had schools that educated our children and didn't hold back classes for the non-English speakers. We had white people who lived, loved and moved around villages and towns doing everyday things and communicating with their own kind. We had relations who were not forced to live hundreds of miles away because they couldn't afford to live locally or work locally. We had buses and trains that worked for us, our children were for the most part looked after by their own mothers, men worked at jobs and at home, and women usually didn't work, or at least until the babies were school age. Preschool was 4.5 if you were lucky, and you stayed until you were 17. Then you went to technical college, art college, polytechnic or university, or you became an apprentice. Jobs were for life or nearly. People had fresh food, and most people didn't spend the money they do now on PCs, techie games, new clothes every week. IKEA and Homebase had not been invented, they spent money on fresh food. Life in the 50s was far from perfect, but it was nearer to perfect than what we have now. Where our own broadcasting system hammers out the Big Brother message, you will accept immigration in vast numbers, you will accept paying out for the loss of your own culture and history, you will accept hundreds of new Islamic centres in your village and town, you will accept that your country is now very nearly an Islamic state, and you will be happy about it. Accept, accept, accept should be the Daleks' mantra from now on in Doctor Who. How did this acceptance start in the media? One word: science fiction. For the last 100 years we've been conditioned in the Western world to accept that people are different in the form of aliens, and we've been made to think that this acceptance of aliens transposes onto the acceptance of immigrants and their cultures into and over our cultures. In days of old, the rule, when you couldn't show a black face, was to use an alien face, and now this rule has reversed to when you cannot use a white face, you use either an alien face or an animal. Ever notice just how many animals feature on adverts and sponsorships on ITV and in children's programmes on BBC? This avoids any problem occurring from some black idiot demanding that there are not enough black faces on television. Acceptance, acceptance and denial are all functioning very well in our entertainment industry, if you can call the BBC that. Too well, in fact. Look at the result. And finally, 2 for Monday. I'm now going to read you famous sayings from famous people. Sometimes when I look at my children I say to myself, Lillian, you should have remained a virgin. Lillian Carter, mother of Jimmy Carter. I had a rose named after me and I was very flattered, but not so pleased to read the description in the catalogue. Not good in bed, but fine against a wall. Alina Roosevelt. Last week I stated this woman was the ugliest woman I've ever seen. I have since been visited by her sister and now wish to withdraw that statement. Mark Twain. The secret of a good sermon is to have a good beginning and a good ending, and to have the two as close together as possible. George Burns. Santa Claus has the right idea. Visit people only once a year. Victor Borg. Be careful about reading health books. You may die of a misprint. Mark Twain. By all means marry. If you get a good wife, you'll be happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. Socrates. I was married by a judge. I should have asked for a jury. Groucho Marx. My wife has a slight impediment in her speech. Every now and then she stops to breathe. Jimmy Durante. I have never hated a man enough to give his diamonds back. Zsa Zsa Gabor and me. Only Irish coffee provides in a single glass all 4 essential food groups: alcohol, caffeine, sugar and fat. Alex Levine. My luck is so bad that if I bought a cemetery people would stop dying. Rodney Dangerfield. Money can't buy you happiness, but it does bring you a more pleasant form of misery. Spike Milligan. Until I was 13 I thought my name was Shut Up. Jonah Marth. I don't feel old, I don't feel anything till noon, then it's my time for my nap. Bob Hope. I never drink water because of the disgusting things that fish do in it. W.C. Fields. We could certainly slow the ageing process down if it had to work its way through Congress. Will Rogers. Don't worry about avoiding temptation. As you grow older, it will avoid you. Winston Churchill. Maybe it's true that life begins at 50, but everything else starts to wear out, fall out or spread out. Phyllis Diller. By the time a man is wise enough to watch his step, he's too old to go anywhere. Billy Crystal. And the cardiologist's diet. If it tastes good, spit it out. Now this is renaming pop songs for the baby boomers. Bobby Darin, Splish Splash, I was having a flash. Herman's Hermits, Mrs Brown, you've got a lovely walker. Ringo Starr, I get by with a little help from Depends. The Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Hip? Roberta Flack, The First Time I Ever Forgot Your Face. Johnny Nash, I can't see clearly now. Paul Simon, 50 ways to lose your liver. The Commodores, once, twice, 3 times to the bathroom. Procol Harum, a whiter shade of hair. Leo Sayer, you make me feel like napping. The Temptations, Papa's got a kidney stone. ABBA, denture queen. Tony Orlando, knock 3 times on the ceiling if you hear me fall. Helen Reddy, I'm a woman, hear me snore. Leslie Gore, it's my procedure and I'll cry if I want to. And at last but not least, Willie Nelson, on the commode again. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. This paedophile sues Britain because his parole hearing was delayed and his human rights were breached, and he's already cost the taxpayer £125,000. A legal immigrant who fathered 5 children while in the UK is jailed for 21 months. Starving Banstead pensioner Gloria Foster's Sutton Care Agency staff Care First 24 charged for immigration offences following police raid. Newbury Muslims dismayed over store's alcohol licence fearing antisocial behaviour. UK news. Sudanese paedophile sues Britain because his parole hearing was delayed and his human rights were breached, and he's already cost the taxpayer £125,000. A Sudanese paedophile jailed for 4 years for raping and sexually abusing teenage girls is suing Justice Secretary Chris Grayling after his parole hearing was delayed. Adil Abul Qadir, 38, was one of the 5 refugees from Darfur who had... Italy rescues 2,000 boat migrants. Sweden, truck collapses sending 200 frozen pigs flying. France, Calais struggles with UK-bound illegal migrants. Pro-Russian crowds seize 2 Ukrainian warships as Ukraine prepares to pull troops from Crimea. Egypt court sentences 528 Brotherhood members to death. Thought for the day, the cowardly BBC. And finally, 2 for 1 day Monday.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 24th of March 2014. Sudanese attacked girls aged 13 and 14 before costing UK taxpayers £125,000 in illegally aided lawyer and interpreter fees during their trial. Abul Qadir, then of Dartford, Kent, was handed an open-ended jail term with at least 4 years behind bars after he was convicted of rape and 3 counts of sexual activity with a child at Maidstone Crown Court in May 2008. He has now convinced a judge at London's High Court that his human rights were arguably violated by the